Hi, welcome back to our first online class of the semester. I'm going to continue to talk about healthcare for a bit, and I'd like to turn my attention to the damn virus. What is the state response? Most of what we're seeing in terms of state response is governors on TV, especially Governor Cuomo, Governor Hogan in Maryland, who are saying places where it's been hit bad. It's mostly New York. Basically saying, shelter in place, get out of the way, don't leave your house, all that other good stuff. But let me tell you just a little bit about what the states are doing. All states and every territory has declared a state of emergency, and that is a technical term in many ways. And what that means is you get the governor has enhanced police powers. That's good or bad, but more importantly, people and businesses become eligible for loans and grants, and you can't be evicted from your house for not paying rent and things like that. So there's a lot to it. You can go look those up. 15 states have declared major disaster areas, and that gives them even more enhanced police powers. The National Guard has been activated in 46 states and a couple of the territories, although I don't know specifically which states they are. And the Guard has been activated mainly to provide assistance on the healthcare side. They're building hospitals, or they're planning on building hospitals and things like that. Not really from a police standpoint yet, hopefully. 30 states have restricted employee travel and enforcing stay-at-home laws. 54 states 50 states and 4 territories and the district have limited gatherings, usually 10 or less people. Hard to enforce. There's a story about cops breaking up a wedding in New Jersey and things like that. Not easy to enforce. Schools are closed everywhere. That is a big problem. Necessary, but a big problem, because schools are closing, and it's to stop. Everything's about stopping the spread of the virus. You guys know that. But for a lot of kids, especially in low-income areas, losing this half a year school is going to be devastating. And hard to come back from. All states and I think every territory now and the district have closed non-essential businesses, movie theaters, obviously bowling alleys, tattoo parlors. 40 states, and this is what I'm shocked that it's not every state, but 40 states have extended their tax filing deadlines. Not sure what's going on with the rest of the states. Dumb. Something to be aware of. And 12 states have delayed or rescheduled their primary elections. Right, this is an election year, so I thought that was pretty interesting. The other thing that states are doing in response to this is they are continuing to work with the CDC, federal authorities, health agencies, private sector, ensure some collaborative response to all of this. And you should be listening to them. So there's a lot of other stuff going on. There's state bills to require like telehealth services, because we don't want you to go to the doctor unless you really have to go to the doctor. So we don't want you. There are other bills in there from paid leave, unemployment benefits. There's all kinds of legislation on support for schools and guidance on schools. There's some bills addressing price gouging, hoarding, toilet paper, other things. And almost all, many states are going to have bills that are actually specifically prohibiting evictions and ensuring the continuation of utility services. Right, because if you can't pay your right? If you lose your job, you can't pay your rent, just shut your water off or sewage off and whatever. It's electricity. So states are not letting people do that. So the state response has been pretty robust. And I think it's been pretty robust. A couple of sources, if you really care about this, if you want to go look at it, the NCSL, the National Conference of State Legislatures, ncsl.org, has a coronavirus page, and it is chock full of really good information on state legislative actions. Some of the stuff has been silly. I mean, symbolic, but most of it is substantive. And they have a list of every state piece of legislation related to coronavirus. And I'm looking at the first one, Alabama SJR 40. Go look it up. Don't look it up. Urges individuals to fist pump rather than shake hands. Because the Alabama legislature took some time off from playing checkers to do that. Ridiculous. Most of them, and most of even the Alabama ones, Alabama's got 20 bills in there, are much more, are not silly. And I don't mean to be making light of this at all. The other place there's a ton of very general information that you should be aware of is the National Governors Association has, again, a coronavirus page, and it is full of coronavirus-related state actions, both legislative and executive branch actions. So it's very good, very good information. But I'm sorry, I'm looking at my NCSL list of legislation, and of all the really good stuff in there, there's a lot of just like BS that they bothered to vote on. So in Florida, SR 1934 declares the Florida State University Seminoles basketball team the NCAA champions. Good to know. I don't know if any of you guys are Florida State grads. I can't remember. I don't think so. Go Seminoles. They're the state champions according to the legislature. Okay, I'm not going to be reading all of these. The other places, by the way, like the National League of Cities, National Association of Counties, probably the ICMA, another state-related, state and local-related organizations have tons of resources where you can find what the state changes are, if you are so inclined. For our purposes, I'd look at the National Governors Association and the NCSL. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to do 3 short videos today on this segment. You know what? I'm not going to stop. Take that back. I'm gonna do the education segment because it's going to be pretty short now. Schools are out basically across the country. Some of them may be back. Some of them won't be back. So state policies with respect to education. Now we're switching gears here. So 2 things. One, states run public universities and colleges. And they are intimately, immensely involved in K through 12 education. That's actually a much bigger part of the pie for them. With respect to higher education, varies tremendously, right? Every state has a public university system. Some are very famous. University of California, right? Berkeley and UCLA, University of Michigan, University of Virginia, famous, fancy, good, very good schools. University of North Carolina, are all very good schools. And some states spend a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort into thinking about it, which is good. So here's the question: is what is the spending on state funding, it's on higher education? So Hawaii, Alaska, and Illinois get the most, interestingly, get the most state support for their higher education. More than 40% of their school budgets are from the state. And in all honesty, the University of Illinois is actually a very good school. I don't know much about the University of Hawaii and Alaska. But it's interesting that those three states have the most funding. The states with the least amount of funding, also, one is not surprising at all, but one is surprising. So Vermont, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania, New Hampshire is at the bottom of those three, get less than 10% of their funding from the state. And that is, I'm surprised about Pennsylvania. I went to a public school in Pennsylvania, University of Pittsburgh, go Panthers, for two of my degrees. And I should have known, and I'm from Pennsylvania, and I didn't know it. In Pennsylvania, Penn State's a very good university. But Penn State, Vermont, New Hampshire, not a lot of state support. Now, New Hampshire doesn't really support anything state government-wise, so that's not surprising. But Pennsylvania and Vermont, you would think, Vermont sends a socialist to the United States Senate, Bernie, you would think they'd spend more money on their schools. But there's not. I mean, there's oversight obviously, and there's state oversight over the K through 12, and public universities. The whole idea behind public universities is that we want to make sure everybody's got the opportunity to go to school, they're wrapped up in competition with the private universities. They're almost always a lot cheaper, in many states and many places, they're almost as good. They're not as good as the Ivies, but they're pretty close in some of the cases. Let's turn to K through 12 now for a minute. And K through 12 is interesting because K through 12, it is all about funding. And traditionally, historically in the United States, K through 12 education was funded and run politically by local governments for almost the entire history of the Republic. And that all changed started to change in the early 70s and then started to change rapidly in the early 80s, where now state governments pay over 50% in many states and over 90% in some states, K through 12 education funding. And historically, 99% of it was paid by local governments through the property tax. So what happened? Why the change? Why the big change? The big change occurred that shifted everything to the states for two main reasons. One, the school equalization finance litigation occurred. So what would happen, if I had a blackboard, I'd draw this for you, but I don't have one at my house. So what would happen is the local governments are paying for the schools through the property tax. And the property tax is all about land values, right? How much the real estate is worth in your community. And so what happened is people realize that if you say take California, if you were in Bakersfield versus some fancy town outside of Cupertino, in where all the rich people live outside of San Francisco, Cupertino could spend a lot more money on their schools than Bakersfield in poor parts of the state. And they said, well, that's not fair. And in fact, it was not constitutional under California law. And this happened in 19 states. And they said, you know what, you can't rely on the property tax to pay for K through 12 education. You need to equalize it. That means the state has to pay it. So that coincided with the property tax revolts, where everybody said, wow, I really hate the property tax. I'd love to be able to discuss this, and maybe we will in another context, maybe another class. People hate the property tax, and they didn't want to use the property tax as much anymore. So that forced the financing of K through 12 education up to the state level in many states. In California, it's over 90%. In Michigan, it's over 90%. Virginia is actually one of the lowest. It's around 37%. That's very rare. New England is still pretty low as well. So the states are now paying for K through 12 education. That is good and bad. On one hand, I'll tell you the bad first. Well, no, I'll tell you the good first. Sorry. The good is potentially you got a lot more money for those poor school districts, right? So if you're in the poorer parts of the state, you're not relying on the property tax to fund your schools, and you've got access to a lot more money. That's generally a good thing. The bad part is it actually hurts the richer school districts because they don't have access to their own money to pay for schools. So even if they want to spend more money on schools, they're difficult to do. It's hard to say, oh, I feel bad about rich people, but if you want to spend more money on schools and teachers, kind of weird that you can't. Secondly, you lose local control over the schools when you centralize the funding, right? So the school districts become just another special interest asking for money in the state capital. And almost inevitably, the state will not give you as much money as local governments and local citizens want or are willing to pay for. That's certainly true in California. So that's a serious problem. Losing the local control, and then everything shifts up to the state, and the state gets to make decisions, and you may or may not like those decisions, and that's a problem with centralization in general. Let's say something else about this. You know what? I'm going to talk a little bit more about the property tax and its relationship with the schools when we talk about state public finance. So I'll tell you what, I'm gonna say goodbye now because I've been going now 17 minutes and 45 seconds in this section, and it takes a long time to download. Be safe, be well, be happy. Write me, and we'll talk to you again next week. Thank you.